and thank you for making the time to join this press call. My name is Vanessa Cárdenas, and I am Deputy Director at America's Voice. Today's conversation is so relevant, and I'm so grateful to have such a wonderful set of speakers. Before we start, I would like to really provide a little bit of context on why this issue is incredibly important to the Latino community and our democracy. In 2020, we saw the impacts of disinformation, which has been well documented by the media and also by researchers across the board. Since then, disinformation has not declined. In fact, it is exacerbated, which has an impact on all of us. The Latino community, as you all know, is more exposed to disinformation by virtue of our social media consumptions. For example, Latinos use YouTube at twice the rate of the general population. And we all know sort of the prevalence that Facebook and WhatsApp have in the Latino community. Since 2020, many organizations, civil rights organizations, elected officials, as well as state and local leaders have called on the platforms to act. Yet, there's plenty of evidence that bad actors continue targeting the Latino community. Another example of this is just 2 days ago, Media Matters released a report that showed that electoral disinformation in Spanish is still very much prominent on YouTube. So the fact is that in spite of the harms of disinformation, in spite of the evidence of disinformation, the social media platforms are not doing enough. And they're not doing enough at the scale that they need to really counter the sort of wave of disinformation the Latino community is facing. So to help us delve further on this topic, let me turn it over to our speakers. First, I would like to introduce Brenda Victoria Castillo, who's President and CEO of the National Hispanic Media Coalition. Brenda, please go ahead.
Thank you all for being here today to talk about this very important issue facing our community. I am proud to stand here in front of all of you as a native Latina feminist representing the National Hispanic Media Coalition, which leads the Spanish language disinformation coalition. We started to work together since 2019 when the white supremacists drove over 600 miles to El Paso, Texas, to a Walmart to massacre Latinos. We knew we had to start working together because Trump had put out over 2,000 ads on Facebook, and the manifest of this white supremacist domestic terrorist said that he needed to take care of the Hispanic invasion on the border. The SLDC is made up of civil rights, Latino leadership, and consumer advocacy organizations. And since 2020, the LCD has worked on joint efforts to eliminate online hate and disinformation, targeting Latinos and the Spanish-speaking community, which in the United States is considered the second largest population of Spanish speakers in the world. We have led discussions and presentations to inform federal agencies like the FTC and Congress about the issues concerning us, coordinated advocacy campaigns, held public panels to educate the public, and held press calls like we are doing here today. For those of you who have followed along with our work, you may feel like today and this letter sounds like a broken record, and you're not wrong. We are frustrated. We are here today again to urge platforms to do more to stop the exploitation of our community through disinformation and fraud online. Every October of an election year, we start to see sudden surge in news and talking points, highlighting the power of the Latino vote. Headlines beam that we have the power to change the trajectory of our country and to safeguard our democracy. But that power is significantly diminished when our familias are bombarded with disinformation campaigns every time they log on to the internet. According to the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, recent research says that 37% of Latinos in the United States do not feel safe at the voting polls. 37% of Latinos in the United States, they don't feel safe at the voting polls. We are being lied to and discouraged to exercise our right to vote on a massive scale. And people in power, people like Mark Zuckerberg, are doing very little while they profit off of the disinformation and hate. We are here today joined by advocates and allies to play this broken record as loud as we can until action and justice stop us. Thank you so much again for being here today. And now I'd like to introduce a friend, a champion, and a warrior on this issue, Congressman Joaquin Castro.
Thank you, Brenda, so much for all of your work and advocacy over the years. And it's great to be with everybody who's working so hard on this issue. I'm Congressman Joaquin Castro, and I'm very proud to represent my hometown of San Antonio, Texas, a city that is 64% Latino, and I have a district that is about 70% Latino. I'm glad to join you all for this conversation specifically about misinformation and disinformation, which I see as fundamental challenges to our democracy and our country. Misinformation and disinformation, of course, are nothing new. Throughout history, there are prominent examples of the serious consequences of fake news, from blood libels against Jewish communities to the quote unquote yellow journalism that preceded the Spanish-American War. But before the internet, the spread of misinformation was often slow, and reliable sources stood out as powerful counterweights to tabloid journalism and politically motivated lies. Today, with the help of social media, fake news and conspiracy theories can spread to millions of people within a matter of minutes. Social media companies would have you believe that their platforms are akin to a modern-day town square where anyone can make their voice heard. The truth is that social media, like many other profit-driven products, has the potential to create both great progress and great harm. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other programs that serve as powerful organizing tools for social change, like we saw, for example, during the Arab Spring movement in the early 2010s. But there are also no doubt that the echo chambers that emerge on these platforms can be damaging to our country, our democracy, and our public discourse. Today, as we approach the midterm elections that will have tremendous consequences for our country, disinformation and misinformation have the potential to irreparably change the course of our country's future and our political future. Misinformation and disinformation are broad problems, but I want to specifically focus on two areas of concern that relate to the Latino community. And also to say that not only as a Latino from a Latino city representing a Latino district and a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, but also as a member of the intelligence community now for 6 years, I have seen the impact of misinformation and disinformation up close. So two specific examples. First, the spread of misinformation, especially Spanish language misinformation, to Latino communities and to Latino voters. 2 years ago, alongside my then colleague, Congresswoman Debbie Mercosal-Powell of Florida, I wrote to FBI Director Christopher Wray, urging the FBI to investigate the systemic dissemination of misleading and manipulative YouTube ads, WhatsApp clips, and Facebook posts to Latino voters. In the aftermath of that year's election, researchers found that a wave of malicious disinformation and had indeed targeted Latino voters, and warned that we could see an even greater surge in 2022 unless social media companies developed a concerted strategy to keep this content off their platforms. This spring, we saw a preview of that wave after the massacre in Uvalde, when false rumors spread on Spanish language WhatsApp channels about the shooter's nationality and gender identity. Even as social media companies have taken steps to combat misinformation, I've been disappointed to see them tolerate lies in Spanish that would never be tolerated in English, and outsource Spanish language content moderation to translators who are unfamiliar with US Latino culture. As the Spanish-speaking share of the electorate grows, the unchecked spread of Spanish language misinformation and disinformation on social media threatens our community's ability to participate in democracy. And I hope that social media companies will wake up and start taking their mission seriously. But I also want social media companies to start paying closer attention to disinformation about Latinos, which is increasingly dangerous. In 2019, despite warnings about the consequences, the Trump campaign, as Brenda mentioned, ran more than 2,000 Facebook ads that portrayed Latinos as invaders to the United States. Before the end of that summer, A madman picked up on Trump's call to action and drove 10 hours to the city of El Paso, Texas, where he killed 23 people and injured 23 more in an attempt to stop what he called the Hispanic invasion of Texas. As their then chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I saw the tragedy in El Paso as an indication that America's main image-defining and narrative-creating institutions had failed to construct a positive vision of Latinos, or even a true vision of Latinos, that could stand up to racist attacks. And I've been pushing the media industry to make progress on that front for 3 years now. But social media is the medium that reaches people first, and lies on social media can embed themselves in the American consciousness like almost nothing else can. Earlier this year, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus wrote to the chief executives of 4 major social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube, to request meetings about misinformation and disinformation targeted at and about Latinos. We've had productive conversations, but executives have not moved fast enough to implement the reforms that will keep social media companies from becoming an even greater threat to democracy in this year's midterm elections. The Spanish Language Disinformation Coalition's letter is an important reminder to social media companies that the Latino community is watching what they do. I hope that Silicon Valley will take the letter's request seriously and move quickly to enact the civic integrity policies that will protect voters and our democracy. And now I know we have a lot of wonderful speakers, and I'll go ahead and turn it back to Vanessa Cárdenas for our next guest.
Great. Thank you so much, Congressman Castro. Now, let me turn it over to some of our Latino leaders who are talking to voters day in and day out. First, I'll turn it over to Melissa Morales, Executive Director of Somos Votantes.
Thank you, Vanessa, and hello, everybody. It's so great to be here with you all today. I apologize for my background and any wind noise. I am in the field with our Detroit team today, knocking on voters' doors, listening to the issues that they're concerned about, and making sure that they are aware that there's an election this year, which I think really highlights the importance of this call today and making sure that they have the same access to the ballot, to democracy, and to safety in their communities that everybody else has. When talking about disinformation, as with almost any issue these days, I think it's easy to become polarized or think about this as a partisan issue, but the reality is that this is not a partisan issue. This is a democracy issue. Disinformation, particularly in Spanish, is incredibly dangerous and particularly potent because of the lack of Spanish language access that we see in many states, and this lack of Spanish language access to good information that leaves the Spanish language community particularly vulnerable to this problem. And in a country whose core foundation is the right of our citizens to vote, this becomes larger than just a Spanish language community issue. This becomes a national issue that affects all of us and affects who we are and who we want to be as a country. And when we allow this disinformation to continue to run rampant in Spanish language channels and on Spanish language platforms, it takes on a malicious and dangerous undercurrent where some people are allowed to access to good information and the ability to participate in a democracy, and others are not, where some people are allowed to live their lives in peace and others are not. I've been on the ground with our team the last few weeks in Nevada, Arizona, and Michigan. Today I'm in Detroit. Last week I was in Las Vegas and Phoenix before that. And it's my standard practice to ask people what they're hearing from voters and hearing from our community. Ask our canvassers, how's it feeling on the ground? And today, one of our canvassers told me, this is a direct quote, "It just feels like some of the information out there is being spread just to confuse voters." That's a direct quote from one of our canvassers on the ground today. And they aren't wrong. We've seen the damage that misinformation can do in elections in states like Florida that has been used as a testing ground for disinformation cycle after cycle, specifically within the Spanish language community. Somos is doing everything that we can to make sure that our community has the tools that they need in both English and Spanish to participate in our democracy. We are doing our part on the ground to combat disinformation. We're building trust in our communities by recruiting trusted messengers and investing in a grassroots communications infrastructure that we can mobilize. But the reality is that we cannot do this alone. We need these social media platforms to also do their part, to invest in more robust and collaborative ways that come directly from them. This means more monitoring on platforms and amplifying methods for people to be able to report disinformation immediately and some action taken to shut down that disinformation immediately. This means amplifying factual information and working with groups like ours on the ground to combat these issues. This really is an all of us issue, and it's going to take all of us to ensure everyone, including Latinos, are not targets for disinformation, but are empowered to fully participate in our democracy. Our hope is that our coalition's letter is the first step in what will be a process to rectify this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And now let's hear from Gustavo Torres, Executive Director of Casa in Action.
Vanessa, thank you very much. And Brenda, I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you so much for taking the lead in all of this. I really appreciate that. Again, Gustavo Torres from Casa in Action. I just want to say we are in the middle of a crisis. That is the reality. We are in the middle of a crisis, and we expect that we can work together to resolve this. I'm so glad to see so many Latinos and Latinas here speaking about this very important issue, because yes, we are in the middle of this crisis. Disinformation to disenfranchised Spanish-speaking Latino voters is a risk that can no longer be overlooked, especially as we move into the 2022 elections and beyond. You know what? During the 2020 elections, disinformation was strategically aimed at the Latino voters to mislead and disinform them. We know that, and we know the result. We know what happened. And still, Media Matter recently report that there are still false Spanish language videos from 2020. Let me repeat it again. Still, we have from 2020 in YouTube, even though that there are explicit policies prohibiting that. So we have a lot of work to do while we're here. Disinformation to the Spanish speakers is not only spreading digitally. You know that last month was reported that the migrants who were sent to Massachusetts by Governor DeSantis from Florida were giving false pamphlets and promised financial aid and opportunities. We know that. And I'm very glad that the federal government is investigating this kind of situation. But you know, as a Latino political organization, we are in very critical states like Pennsylvania and Georgia, and they are killing us with this misinformation. I just want to tell you that it's so scary. And in particular, we are in South Central Pennsylvania, where is a very huge lack of local Spanish language media outlets. And because that, so people relied in Facebook and WhatsApp, right, like to receive information. And the ultra-right Republicans know about that. And they are targeting the Latino and immigrant community. They are targeting the Puerto Rican community. They are targeting our members. This is totally, totally unacceptable. And we need to resolve this situation. And this is just the type of the iceberg. We all have seen how Pennsylvania disinformation has helped to inspire an insurrection that almost tore down this country. We know that. And that is the reason why I believe that we are in the middle of this crisis, that we need to resolve this situation. And that is the reason Casa and everyone else right over here send a letter to the CEOs of Meta, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Snap to make sure that they respond to us to resolve this crisis, because they have the power to resolve the crisis that we are facing in our community before this midterm election. It's so very important that they speak out. And I hope that we are going to have a meeting very soon with them to explain how critical it is and the role and responsibilities that they have to resolve this crisis. The Republicans and the right-wing organization have paid millions and millions of dollars for hateful, misleading digital ads aimed to attack and to focus in the immigrant community. That is exactly what they have been doing. And they have been doing this for years now. And we together need to stop this. We are demanding that these institutions that are making a lot of money in our community speak out and resolve the crisis that we are facing. Thank you very much, Vanessa. I'm happy to answer any question that people have.
Great. Thank you so much, Gustavo. And now our last speaker is Agustin Rossi, he is the responsible technology director at Omidyar Network. Agustin, please go ahead.
Gracias, Vanessa. Gracias, Brenda. I wanted to talk a bit about what can the companies do and the government do. I think that we should be proud that we have the most pro-democracy, consumer-friendly, and techno-skeptical administration and Congress in generations. It's no accident that President Biden invited Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen to the State of the Union. It's no accident that we have champions like Lina Khan, Becca Slaughter, and our own Álvaro Bedoya in the FTC that are like advancing new rules to protect consumers from abusive tech platforms. And it's no accident that Congress has been debating important rules, for example, on antitrust and on children protection online to actually change the business model that encourages companies to promote disinformation and harmful content. Unfortunately, time is running out on that front as well. It's urgent that the White House and leadership in Congress commit to use the time left in this Congress to pass bipartisan legislation that would ameliorate and start tackling this horrible problem. But when we consider the role of platforms, I think it's important to keep in mind that the social media industry is the only industry that is allowed to sell a defective and harmful product. When we go to the supermarket, we don't have to worry. We don't have to think that 30% of the bread in the supermarket is gonna be poisonous. When we go to a restaurant, we're not asked to exercise best judgment to avoid salmonella. Those industries are demanded to be safe. We need to demand platforms that they add seatbelts and airbags for the digital era to protect consumers. That's the first thing we need to ask them to do. The other thing that platforms could do immediately is to start enforcing their own community standards. A lot of the disinformation and online violence we see is already forbidden by their own companies. They don't do enough to stop this. Frances Haugen today was reminding me that over 90% of the resources that Facebook spends on fighting disinformation is spent in English. So like it would be useful if they would start spending money in combating disinformation and online violence in Spanish. It would be useful as well, and this is not happening because like executives in these tech companies are not Latinos. Latinos are completely underrepresented in the workforce of these companies, but particularly at the executive level. And so when we think about how to fight disinformation in the short term, we need to demand companies that implement like design changes. Facebook and Google have researchers that know that with very modest, very simple design changes, like for example, making sure that people cannot simply like forward messages or cannot simply retweet without reading content, they can slow down and diminish the impact of disinformation and online violence. If they're not doing it, it's because they don't care about the Latino community.
Okay. Thank you, Gus. Now we are going to questions. And just a reminder, please send your questions to Ross Arair in the chat. I'm gonna go look for the questions that I think Ross already sent me, but before I do that, I wanna just underscore a couple of things that our speakers have said. The impact of this information is real, and organizations that have been working on the ground around voter engagement are seeing this every day. And we all have a responsibility to ensure that everybody's vote is counted and that no one is disenfranchised in this way. The other point I really want to stress is, again, that we need solutions that are at scale of the problem. And the platforms have the resources, the know-how to actually implement safeguards that are at the scale of the problem. And the last thing I want to underscore, and this is some of the things that both Melissa and Gustavo alluded to, but also Gus, Agustin, we need more content moderation. We need the platforms to promote the right information. We need the amplification, to stop the amplification of voter disinformation. And we also, for sure, need to hire more Spanish language moderators and folks that really understand the communities in which disinformation is spreading. So with that, let me go over to see the questions that we have. All right, so first we're gonna go to Benjamin Wermund from the Houston Chronicle. His question is for Representative Castro. Have you seen examples of mis or disinformation in Texas elections this cycle? And can you talk a bit about how important this is to Texas, especially this cycle when so much focus is on Latino voters in South Texas?
Sure. I mean, it's absolutely critical. Well, as I mentioned in my comments, part of the biggest challenges that we've had is a lot of the policing efforts at combating disinformation and misinformation were done in, or have been done in, the English language, which is obviously incredibly important in American politics and for American democracy. But there is a large segment of folks who are speaking Spanish, and by the way, who are speaking other languages as well, whether it's Chinese or Vietnamese or other native languages to those communities. And so that has been an incredible problem. With respect to Texas, I mentioned the examples of Uvalde, where misinformation got out there very quickly and continues to leave an impression with folks. And, so that has been a problem. And I think every cycle, I think, unless the companies take it seriously, we're going to continue to have problems with misinformation, disinformation in Texas and beyond.
Great. Thank you, Congressman. And now we're going to go to our second question. This is Claudia from AP. The question is from Claudia from AP. And she's asking, can you please provide examples of disinformation and misinformation in Spanish related to the midterms? This question might be good for either Melissa or Gustavo. Do you guys have any examples of disinformation related to the elections as you conduct your work on the ground? Oh, I think we lost Melissa. But
Is Gustavo here? We do. We have, one more time, we have several examples of the way how they are attacking our community in different ways. And again, it's very, very, very similar. They are using the same language that ex-President Trump used in the past, that we are criminals, that we are rapists, that we are invading this country. It happened in Pennsylvania, it happened in Georgia, it's happening all around. So it's kind of the same language that they are using right now and was very successful with them a few years ago. So we are facing the same challenges. And that is the reason why, again, as I mentioned, it's so important that we have these, Spanish language moderators, because it's the only way that they are going to monitor what is exactly the misinformation that is happening every single day. Y otra vez quiero decirlo en español porque es muy importante. Todo eso está ocurriendo en español. Todo eso está ocurriendo y nos están desinformando en nuestro propio idioma. Lo están haciendo en nuestro propio idioma. Son tan estratégicos que utilizan los mismos tonos e incluso acentos de diferentes países para poder comunicarse y decirle mentiras a nuestra comunidad. Por eso es que queremos denunciar esto y por eso es tan importante que haya una inversión para resolver este problema por estas instituciones, estas social media in Spanish. I'm saying again, they are manipulating us in our own language. They are doing this and they are very strategic the way how they are doing. So that is the reason why we believe that it's so important that these companies from the social media do something about, because it's their responsibility. They are making a lot of money on our community. Thank you.
And I want to also underscore a point that Congressman Castro made, that a lot of this disinformation that we see is also about us, about Latinos or about immigrants. And one example of a narrative that we are seeing both in English and Spanish, because remember, a lot of the narratives that we see in English are also in Spanish. So one recent disinformation narrative is about non-citizens voting, which is a narrative that we always see around the election, that people who should not be voting are voting. And normally what this narrative do is that they take examples of mistakes so that sometimes are made, and they make it seem like there is this sort of strategy to get non-citizens to vote. So that is the narrative that we're already seeing, and it's probably going to continue being a problem for the days and weeks to come.
Hola a todos. This is Emmanuel Leal. I'm the National Communications Director for Somos Votantes. Melissa had to step away.
Great.
But the examples we've seen are a little more surgical. It's general, just misinformation about election dates, locations, how, when to vote, specifically targeted at Spanish-speaking Latinos and Latinas. Nevada in particular is a new universal vote by mail state. And so this will be the first midterm election where we will have universal vote by mail. And so that is just a prime environment for disinformation to thrive, which is why this work is so important for us to be able to get real commitments, a real follow through from some of the social media platforms. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for that. And that's absolutely correct. Any other questions? Please send them to Ross. Do we have any more questions for Ross?
Yeah, sorry, I'll jump in just in the interest of time. We do have one more question from Robert Downen. He asks, I'm wondering what legislatively could be done to address this issue, and will Representative Castro pursue any reforms related to these issues?
The legislative efforts so far have been fairly light. I believe that Don Beyer had a bill that established the Educating Against Misinformation and Disinformation Act, which establishes a commission and requires other activities to support information and media literacy and education. But that's about the extent of it so far, of the notable pieces of legislation that I've seen. And y'all know, especially folks in the media, that I think there is a countervailing concern that you don't want to infringe on freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and so forth. So I think that there has been a lot of wrestling with what legislation would look like so that you're not doing the things that I described. But Don Beyer's piece of legislation is a good one to look at.
Agustin, do you have any thoughts on this front?
I think that the Congressman is right. I also think that given that, it's important to think about ways to change and challenge the business model of tech companies. So tech companies make money by keeping people going back to the platforms, by retaining attention. And it happens to be that their algorithm discovered that promoting extreme content, harmful content, enraging content is a very lucrative way to do it. So considering the restrictions and considerations that we have in our constitutional system, it's useful to think, well, how do we change those incentives and we change that business model? And one way to do it is to think, how do we get privacy legislation? How do we get product design changes, like what happened in California recently with adoption of the age-appropriate design code? How do we create competition in the tech space so consumers have incentives to choose different products, and companies have to deal with potential competitors that might offer better products and not rely on their monopoly to do whatever they want. I think those are things that Congress is considering as well, and that they are possible and they are at hand. I think that what we need is a commitment from both from the White House and from leadership in Congress to make these things happen while we can. I think that the reality is that things are probably gonna get harder. It's gonna be harder to tackle these issues after January 2023.
And I wanted to follow up. I was asked a question about Texas earlier. One of the most pernicious conspiracies that's gone around was that 2000 Mules film that, Ben, to answer your question, that Ken Paxton, for example, was organizing watch parties around, actively doing in-person events, but also using social media to promote the idea and to organize around the idea. And a lot of that essentially went unchallenged.
Thank you, Congressman.
Can I add small thing? So I think legislation is important. I think that we should also keep in mind that American companies are gonna offer European consumers, in virtue of new laws that the European Union just approved are gonna be enforced, completely new protections on disinformation, on giving access to independent researchers to their data so they can understand the nature of the problem, to fact-checking resources, that we should demand that they offer those same resources, those same protections to American consumers. They're gonna do that. They're gonna do that starting very soon. And that doesn't require new legislation, that just requires them doing the very minimum, which is offering American consumers the same benefits that they're gonna give European consumers, particularly considering how much they've taken from this country. That this is their main market, and the reason why they've managed to innovate and exist and raise capital is because they are based in the United States.
Thank you, Agustin.
And then,
Brenda, did you want to say?
yeah, let me just add a couple of things. And I know we're talking about legislation, but things that can happen right now, everyone, we have agencies that we have to make accountable. So the Federal Trade Commission is supposed to protect consumers from fraud. They have a say-so. I think they need to oversee and start taking action when it comes to platform accountability. The FCC, again, with broadcasting, there's a spill of disinformation going on broadcasting, especially in Spanish radio. They need to be doing their job too in making those broadcasting stations accountable. And then we have the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is supposed to work for us, the public. They're being paid through our taxes, and they continue to approve mergers when companies have shown that they have been discriminatory against Latinos, when they have shown that they have not taken safe protocols. So all these three agencies add to the problem, and they need to be kept accountable too. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for those insights. Do we have any other questions? Okay, wonderful. So again, thank you so much for joining. We will send the letter that the coalition sent to the platforms as a follow-up, as well as the recording of this press call. But thank you so much for joining, and we are available for any questions or follow-up you may have. Thanks to our wonderful speakers, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.